You're kind of low.
18 players and welcome. This is fun divisional round, Bob. There's so much stuff that happened here last week that I think I just want to jump to the fact that Rich Eisen gave that it's kind of going around. Only 5 times since they've started allowing the wild cards have two teams from the same division got into the playoffs, and both of those teams failed to ever have a lead in their respective games, effectively showing up and losing out immediately. And the last 2 times that happened, it was both the Dallas Cowboys and Philadelphia Eagles. So, Bob, which train wreck do you want to start with?
I mean, Joe, when it comes to both of these games, one was not predictable and the other was predictable.
Yeah.
So let's first start with Dallas. Now, Dallas was, when we were going through all this stuff in the preseason, was one of my favorite teams in terms of what I thought that they could do this year because they did put a lot of stuff together in the offseason. Tony Pollard was supposed to have this breakout year, and you were adamantly against that was going to happen. And CeeDee Lamb was ready for a come up. They had Brandon Cooks, Michael Gallup, all these other role players were finally healthy. They had a defense led by Michael Parsons, which was, one of the defenders that if you follow IDP fantasy football stuff, you knew about for a long time. If you followed college football, you knew about him a long time. And if you were a Cowboys fan, this kid is a defensive MVP style player. And the back end of their defense was kind of suspect at times. And you're like, okay, Dallas has a chance if Dak can make that next step forward. And he did. This is one of those things for Dak that every season we say what Dak Prescott is going to show up. Is it going to be the Dak Prescott that shows a lot of toughness? Is it going to be the guy that can lead your team down the field constantly? What's going to happen? Now, in this game specifically, I don't think
that's why they lost that game, though.
In this game specifically, one of the things that we noticed, and this is what a lot of media is talking about, not only are we talking about Dak not showing up for the majority of this game, and his stat line doesn't say that because that stat line's padded with second and third stringers on Green Bay's defense in the fourth quarter.
I get that, but even in the first half, it wasn't that he was missing. He wasn't fumbling and missing drastically. There were drops.
Oh yeah, and that's kind of where I want to get at is that all season long, and I can't remember who on ESPN said it. It might have been Dan Orlovsky. It might have been somebody in that regard. Is that the Dallas Cowboys all year had played a football game in which they were relying on their defense to get takeaways. And this defense, when it got takeaways, set the offense up in great positions and then allowed them to play with a lead in a lot of games. And when Dak has a lead, we all know that he could keep that lead for mostly, for all intents and purposes. But Jordan Love and the Green Bay Packers, give them credit where credit is due. They did not turn the ball over. They handled that ball so well. And that probably was one of the best games that Aaron Jones has played in, the last 2 or 3 years. He's an incredible running back that we didn't see a lot this season because of the injury early on in the season. We both liked him going into this season because, all the pieces were there. Now, granted, we had the Packers towards the bottom of the division when we were going with our projections, but that wasn't because, of the offense. That was because that we didn't think that this defense would step up, and they did in this game.
I had certainly questions in that receiver room for Green Bay. I think I still do, to be honest.
You saw in this game the fact that you have these wide receivers with, they're not name brand, your Stephon Diggses and your CeeDee Lambs of the world, but these are role play wide receivers. And these are wide receivers that the type of wide receiver that Green Bay always manages to get on their team. Green Bay manages to survive with players like Marquise Valdez-Scantling, with the Donald Driver. Donald Driver is a great player, but he's not that head and shoulders above where anybody else. Jordy Nelson came out of the woodwork with them, with Rodgers. And this is what we see constantly. We see a top heavy wide receiver usually from Green Bay with like Devontae Adams and things like that. And I would say out of all the wide receivers I mentioned, Devontae Adams is probably one of their best, offensive players that they've had in the last 20, 30 years outside of Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers.
Actually.
And you look at it and you say, well, Green Bay's doing a lot. And this is the point that I want to get to about Green Bay is that Chicago game earlier on in the season was a kind of a measuring stick for them. Is Jordan Love played like garbage in the early part of that game. He came back and he showed that he wasn't willing to give up as a quarterback. And yes, they lost Christian Watson at various points in time this season, but Jayden Reed showed up, Romeo Doubs showed up. You even had like Malik Heath and Bo Melton tight ends. You had the tight end show up, Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft. These are all players that, unless you live in Green Bay or unless you follow football religiously, that you have no idea who any of these guys are. And the Packers put on a masterclass. Their coaching staff, their offense, their defense in this game, and they owned the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, they did a lot of great things there. Starting with they showed that the defense that needs to make turnovers, which the Cowboys are, you can run right through them. And that is a massive problem that any defense has. The first thing you need to do is stop the run, period. And they mentioned that a lot just for comparison in the Detroit game, because 2 years ago, Detroit couldn't stop anything. And if you can't stop the run, you can't create turnovers. The thing with Dallas was people bought into the hype before they got on the field. So they started forcing passes downfield, thinking that Dak was going to put up 40. And they started playing a game that was like that. And Green Bay said no. 3 of their first 4 touchdowns were a direct result of running the ball down their face. They literally demasculated the Dallas defense before our eyes. And you throw in a couple drops like Ferguson and Lamb, and now all of a sudden you give away 2 possessions and the thing's over. Again, I don't think Dak was truly the problem.
Well, there was a lot.
I really think it was the drops. The team as a whole got shell-shocked, and then they hit panic mode. And
it was the coaching. It was the coaching. And there's a couple, and when we get to these teams as we get to these teams, as we go through what just happened, as we look ahead to the future for all these teams, is this coaching, they came out and they had this game plan, and you couldn't see what they were trying to do at any one point in time, realistically. It was very clear that the Green Bay Packers were playing for more. And it was very clear that the coaching staff's game plan was specifically designed to make this defense of Dallas be basically non-existent. They played this game similar to how Seattle played their game, in my mind, is that, they made the Dallas secondary look silly in a lot of different ways. And then they used the running game when available to really just pound it out. But the difference between what Seattle brought out and what the Green Bay Packers brought out is that Aaron Jones, at this point in time in his career, is a better overall talent, in my opinion, than both Ken Walker and Zach Charbonnet, who they were trotting out against Dallas. And the fact is, too,
just comparing those 2 games, Jones was the starting point. In Seattle, Walker was more of a, not necessarily secondary thought, but he was definitely not the first.
Right.
And Green Bay making that shift of saying, we're going to attack you on the ground is a way that really the Cowboys haven't expected. I mean, they didn't.
Absolutely.
It's crazy.
And that's the tough thing to say. And, you saw so many Dallas Cowboys fans on TikTok, X and Instagram, punching their televisions, yelling, screaming, and all this stuff. And they deserved it. This fan base has had 3 12-win teams in the last 3 years. And they have not been able to put anything together for a long period of time in the playoffs. And you look, Aaron Jones has more touchdowns in that stadium in the playoffs than I think any Dallas Cowboy does in this last stretch of time. And I'm fairly certain that Green Bay has a better record than the Dallas Cowboys in recent memory in the playoffs too. And this is a testament to what Green Bay as a team wanted to build this year. Right? You're looking at a team that took those first rounders that we were moaning and complaining about in the offseason and turned them into productive players, albeit not the best group of players that a team can trot out, but they made it work. And Jordan Love said, hey, I'm the guy here now. This is the opening salvo of Jordan Love's career. I mean, we don't want to overtalk a player, and I'm not going to, because this is perfectly acceptable for where Jordan Love is right now.
No, we're going to be talking a real rookie a little bit later on.
But he showed that he's a leader. He showed that he can put the ball in the hands of players and let them do their job. Romeo Doubs had no right to be putting up 140 yards in that game, but he did. And Luke Musgrave took advantage of a broken play. These are what good players and good teams do. And we're going to talk a little bit about what good teams who don't have players like that do, Pittsburgh Steelers.
Well, I'm actually glad you made that segue there, because Jordan Love is the same age as Kenny Pickett. So at that point in their age group for development, there was no chance that Kenny Pickett was ever going to develop into this. It's not going to happen. So you look at the difference just in these two organizations, the Steelers and the Packers, for a moment. Both of them are essentially considered historical dynasties. They win games a lot. Steelers case, they don't have losing records ever. And when you look at this and look at what the direction is, the one has been an intellectual offensive genius, moving things around and creating open plays regularly. Yes, Rodgers could put the ball anywhere, but a lot of his receivers are more open than your average throughout the league. And the only other person who comes close in scheming receivers open to LaFleur is McVay. It's a fact. Sure, Shanahan is a third, and he gets all the credit, but these two, if you actually watch the tape, are ahead of them in Green Bay and the Rams. So the point being, Love showed everything you need to see. I'm more confident in Jordan Love being a top 10 quarterback for the next 7 years than I am with Lawrence. And I believe both winning-wise,
I'm not going to fight you on that.
I'd rather have Love than Lawrence moving forward.
So I like this comparison that you've brought up, because I think when it comes to young quarterbacks, situation makes all the difference. When it comes to any quarterback, really, situation makes all the difference. And Jordan Love is surrounded by a group of players. And watch him go out and just lay an egg next week. But, Jordan Love is surrounded by a group of players that we have seen, like I've said earlier, that Aaron Rodgers, that the Brett Favres of the world bring up, and they make their players more than the sum of what they might be, right? Whereas when you have Jacksonville, you now have what we thought was another quarterback that could do that same thing with their players, right? You had Evan Ingram last year, you had Christian Kirk, you have guys like Zay Jones, but then you have and then you have a talented running back in Travis Etienne.
Also Ridley.
The issues that we see, though, in this quarterback situation is that there seems to be an inability, and maybe I'm incorrect in saying this.
Lawrence was hurt.
So anybody watching this, correct me if I'm incorrect on this, but there seems to be an inability to fix, in Jacksonville at least, to fix things that you're doing wrong. And I bring that up because going back again to that Bears game is that you saw that kind of shift as the season went on. And even on that Thanksgiving game, people were saying, oh, he got snubbed. He didn't get a piece of the turkey leg or whatnot. And that really, you could see a shift as the season went on with Jordan Love's playing. Now, Trevor Lawrence, on the other hand, was pretty much doing the same thing the whole year, and it wasn't working. and none of it was working. And the fact
Jacksonville worked
remains
when Etienne went off, and if he didn't,
well,
they
yeah,
didn't.
but the thing is that you saw Jordan Love with Dillon, you saw him with Jones, you saw him with Patrick Taylor, you saw him with all these different style of running backs, and the Packers were successful. And you look at it and you say, okay, the Jaguars, while successful some days, overall it was overall disappointing. There was so many drop passes, similar to Dallas. There's so many players not pulling their weight, and I think that the thing that separates both Jacksonville and the Packers is that the players that are there aren't doing the things that are fundamental to their game and to their position. Like, you can't have a talent like Ridley keep dropping passes. You can't have Trevor Lawrence keep throwing it into coverages that don't make any sense for him to throw it into. You can't have him just not use Christian Kirk or use Evan. Like, these are issues with coaching. These are issues with just cognition of what you're trying to do as a team and scheming. It just wasn't working. And for some reason, the Jaguars weren't able to get out of that. And we might see next year that Trevor Lawrence ends up pulling it out and ends up being okay. But what we saw this year was a far cry from what people were speaking of as a generational talent. But yet I don't think his stats were very much different.
Well, so,
and I'm going to look that up while you share.
So just to put the bow on Jacksonville, and we'll get off the anti-playoff teams here in a minute, is that they once again proven the plexiglass theory correct. And the plexiglass theory essentially goes like this. If you are a top 5 drafting team, and then the following year, I mean, that draft and then the season, you then can make a giant jump forward, which Jacksonville did. They went from first pick overall, worst record in the league the year prior, winning their division. The third year, you tend to regress back closer to where you were before the explosion. So Jacksonville then regresses back to a non-playoff team. And I bring this up for 2 reasons. First, it looks very much, because it's identical, to what Houston did. Houston, second pick overall, made the playoffs. Next year, I expect a regression. But you look at the team that's in between that division that was just hanging out, bunch of old quarterbacks, but winning, down year, now just off the cusp. And I'm telling you right now, I'm already calling the Colts to win that division next year, and we're going to talk about Houston a little bit later on.
So
I bring that up so that it shows that in the league, there is a speed limit in how much you can consistently progress from year to year. You can do what Baltimore's done and be a 10-plus team and maintain it. But you cannot go from a 4-win team to a multi-digit win team and maintain it. You have to have already had a track record to get there, which is one of the things that the Packers had greatly in their favor. LaFleur doesn't really implode. So when you look at that, I love the direction the Packers are going. I give them a tremendous amount of a chance this week. And granted, some of it's recency bias. I just saw them tear apart Dallas. But also, there's a strong degree that Dallas was fairly overrated. And
to bring to your point, too.
Other AFC team that was super overrated. We can go in any order you want.
Yeah, to bring to your point, just about Trevor Lawrence's comparison here to Jordan Love, because it will be a nice segue to talk about C.J. Stroud and, a couple other players that we're seeing do a little bit better than expectations in some regards. The sack, usually when we look at quarterbacks and we say, where's the difference from year to year? Maybe it was an offensive line problem. Maybe something happened. Well, you look at Jacksonville and you look at the sacks. First year, 32 sacks. Last year, 27 sacks. This year, 35 sacks. So sack numbers went up, but not drastically, right? And then you look at his numbers statistically. Yardage totals, only about 100 less than last year, but 14 more interceptions, 4 less passing touchdowns. He put 4 through on the ground like he did last year with 5. So, and these numbers, like you said, the interceptions are settling back to what he threw his first year, which was 17. He went down to 8 last year. So you would have thought with a better group of players and you can't even blame this on Zay Jones being out and this whole thing. The narrative wasn't there. There's no sacks. So there was no problem logistically with that offensive line. You can't say that those, 7 or so more sacks would lead to more, it's more pressure, but that's only 7 where is this blame going to? So
it's straightforward. Their game script was completely different year over year. You look at 2 years ago to this year, their defense produced pressure 2 years ago. It created sacks. This year, it didn't. So therefore, there was a lot more Jacksonville having to play from behind, a lot more losing as a result. But really, it was that defense did not produce early in games, which is where it's more important. Early in games to get an establishment.
So this is what I want to ask you.
Stats can get skewed by garbage time at the end. But that was the fundamental fact. The defense of the Jags really hasn't shown up, and Trayvon Walker might be one of the worst first pick overall busts that we have.
But here's the problem with this, Joe, and I really don't want to talk about the Jaguars anymore, but I want to bring this up, is that this is something that we saw out of a guy called Blake Bortles too, where when the Jacksonville Jaguars defense was humming, Blake Bortles looked like the second coming of a couple other quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. Then when Saxonville went away and there was no pressure, we saw a regression to a mean that wasn't good. And now I'm not saying that Trevor Lawrence isn't a good quarterback, but I'm not saying that he's this generational quarterback that we're going to be looking at 40, 50 touchdowns from, like we've seen out of Hall of Fame generational legacy type of quarterbacks like Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, Tom Brady. And a guy like Jordan Love, while he doesn't have that, upward mobility, I think at this point right now, it seems like that he's in a better situation in Green Bay, that with a number one wide receiver that truly is a number one wide receiver, because we don't think that Christian Watson is.
Watson's not even the best receiver on the team.
With a true number one wide receiver, or with the development of these young wide receivers, Green Bay is the youngest offense, I think, in the entire league. Mm-hmm. You have a team that's ready to grow. And you have a team where this is an organization that loves to keep their quarterbacks for a long time, and they want to develop this quarterback into a generational talent. I mean, they've only had 3 quarterbacks in the last 30 years in our lifetime, outside of injuries to the main quarterbacks. They've only had 3 long-term quarterbacks.
And when you look at the Packers here, first off, we're going to have a lovely offseason of which ones to invest in fantasy, and it will not be Watson for my fan. I already know the 2 it's going to be. Mm-hmm. But the point being is that Dobbs and Dell are the real deal. And when you look at the way that the Cowboys attacked, there's a reason. You mean to say with Houston and Green Bay here? No, just with Green Bay's group.
Well, they have Reed and Dobbs.
Sorry, Reed. I'm saying Dell. I meant Reed. Yeah. Reed is going to be their number 1 next year, and Dallas showed you it. When they were spying around their corner who had all the interceptions, it was on Reed the entire game. And Dobbs was clearly
he had 1 catch in that game, man.
No, it's because it was at the end. Mm-hmm. Green Bay basically said Dallas had 2 defenders worth caring about, and then they treated them accordingly. Mm-hmm. They ran right at Parsons until he became exhausted, because he had never really had that before. Mm-hmm. They just didn't throw at the guy who gets all the picks. It's a great game plan to exploit an overrated defense.
Do we want to talk about the next disappointing team, or do we want to get to talking about a team that people are excited to see right now out of the
Let's stay in the division, get excited.
All right. So if I want to, I'd like to talk about Philadelphia for a moment.
Okay, let's go a little disappointing then.
I want to be excited. I want to be excited a little bit later in the show, because I'm really pumped for the Lions.
Hey, I'm all cool with hate on the NFC East.
And so I want to bring this to Philadelphia, because I think a lot of people in the media, and a lot of people on TikTok, a lot of people on Instagram, they nailed it. They've nailed it with Philadelphia right here. And Steve Smith said it, and I don't remember if he said it a couple weeks ago or if he said it this week, is that this offense right now, the way it's being coached, looks like a high school offense, and it's running like a high school offense. And a couple other people that I've come across in recent weeks have said, why do you not give the ball to DeAndre Swift? What's the problem with this passing game? Why is it looking so anemic? Why is this defense so bad? And there's a common denominator that has been, leaching into the NFL in recent years. Is Matt Patricia. Matt Patricia is the, special defensive assistant or whatever. But everything he touches turns to tartar sauce. It is the worst position that you could ever hire this man for. And there has been, some creators that I've come across, and I just really think that when it comes to the Philadelphia Eagles, it is not the sum of the talent on the field that is the issue. It is the complete and utter ineptitude of this coaching staff. Nick Sirianni doesn't look like he can coach these players. I'm going to let you rebuttal this in a moment, but he does not look like he is able to get, like we were saying, out of LaFleur and even McCarthy, get the best out of his players. Like this is a guy that has 2 elite options at wide receiver, plus a former elite option at wide receiver. You have a quarterback that should be able to produce meaningful numbers, not just for fantasy purposes. And you have a running game that has DeAndre Swift, Kenneth Gainwell, Boston Scott. These are guys that, outside of fantasy football, you might not know, and outside of Philadelphia, you might not know Gainwell and Scott, but these are proven, players that will move the ball for you and make plays. And defensively, this defense should be, they invested a lot up front on this defense going into the season. And yeah, they might have been a better rushing defense than a passing defense, but boy, like the fact that they allowed Baker Mayfield just to get this ball to the nobodies that are on Tampa Bay that aren't even Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. You covered them, but you let Trey Palmer, Cade Otton, all these other, and David Moore. These are players that are realistically, like in fantasy circles, these are guys that you don't even know about. That these are guys that you don't even pick up. You're picking up the Romeo Dobbses, the Jaden Reeds of the world. You're not really picking up Moore, Palmer, and Baker Mayfield. For as much maligned as he is as a quarterback in his career, they made him look really, really good. And the fact is that, stats tell one end of the story, and, watching the box score is one thing. But in the game, a lot of bad decisions are being put on the field by Philadelphia. And going into that game, you have lost terrible losses to Arizona, the Giants. These are unequivocally bad losses. And you went from a team that put up 10 wins, leading up into those games, and you look like trash. And granted, A.J. Brown didn't play. I don't even think it would have been, it might have been like a little bit closer, maybe by a touchdown. But overall, the scheming for this game was wrong. The way that the effort that these players are putting in outside of Devonta Smith was wrong. I mean, you look at DeAndre Swift, he had like 25 yards and then 7 yards after that. How do you stop? What is going on in your mind? And if you're a Philadelphia fan, I think the Cowboys, realistically speaking, yeah, they got killed in that game. But these two teams, there are a couple players on these teams that are like, yeah, this is a good player. We want to keep this player. But as for Steelers fans, there is a call to blow up the roster right now.
Yeah, there should be.
Outside of the super talented players. But Sirianni and this coaching staff, particularly Matt Patricia needs to not be hired on an NFL team ever again. This guy ruined Mac. I mean, if you couldn't ruin a quarterback more, he ruined Mac Jones completely and utterly. I mean, I don't know what there was to ruin, but he ruined them. Mm-hmm. He ruined the Detroit Lions. You've seen what Dan Campbell has done with the Detroit Lions, the type of players that he's and the type of players that he got in to own up to it. And you just go back and you look at a video of Matt Patricia with the Lions team when they actually won a game. Nobody gave a shit. Absolutely nobody did. And it goes to that locker room. That locker room, I know that Nick Sirianni is better than this. I know that, he can produce, what they did with Shane Steichen last year. I mean, I know that this team can do more. And as a Philadelphia fan, you have to be more disappointed than Cowboys fans, because Cowboys fans know that their team's at least going to lose in the first round. They know that's going to happen. But Philadelphia fans, they did not expect losing to this the magnitude of this loss is so much worse than the magnitude of the loss that Dallas Cowboys took, because Dallas at least showed some effort at the end of the game. Like, they at least put some points on the board against these second and third stringers. And that, I mean, yeah, they gave up. But I mean, at what point in time did the Philadelphia Eagles give up? Was it halftime? Was it the second quarter? Because I didn't see a team on that field the entire time from Philadelphia's side.
So, first off, Sirianni is not the problem, but I will never defend Matt Patricia. I'm not going to try.
He's undefendable.
So let's get to what I believe the big difference between Philadelphia was when they made the Super Bowl run and this year. And to me, it comes down really to the three fundamental areas. And I'll start with the defense, because I believe the defense is really what made that team work last year, and it fell apart this year. They traded away Edwards, who most people have no idea.
That's Matt Patricia. That's Matt Patricia. That's Matt Patricia. That's the reason why this defense. Yeah, they lost CJ. They got rid of CJ Gardner-Johnson. They got rid of a lot of players from that defensive core, but they did get players back. And that team,
no, they never replaced their linebacking core, and that's the starting point. So when you look at the Eagles' defense, it is based around two things: defensive front that only attacks the quarterback, and then the linebackers clean up the tackles on running plays, and the ability to cover in the middle of the field. That's what the linebacker's job is, and they did not replace Edwards' talent. It's part of the reason the Bears improved so much on defense after losing Roquan Smith. That's how good Edwards was. He was able to step in and replace the best backer in the league, essentially. So that's a key starting point. The other part is the way you look at the Eagles, and they knew this was coming. Their interior defensive linemen were aging out. They were hoping to get 7 more games out of Fletcher Cox. It didn't happen. If you look at their defensive front now, it's basically 3 players, 13-year vets or longer, and 2 rookies from Georgia. That is their defensive front. And the bottom line is the rookies weren't able to fill the gap fast enough for the aging ones to disappear. And their pass rush never developed the second half of the year. It started off fine, and when their pass rush was winning, that team is dominant. Because then all of a sudden, just like the Cowboys, people don't have time to pick apart the rest of your inferior cornerback play.
So you're saying that
you get picks.
You're saying that the age of that front,
yes,
led directly
to them not being able to get pressure anymore. And then
to the 42-19. So, but the issue that I have with that, Joe, is that you're saying that the catalyzing thing is either injuries or age here for the Philadelphia Eagles.
Their defensive, specifically their defensive tackles, yes.
Okay, so when we look at this, then how much of that? I get what we said earlier about Jacksonville, what we said about Dallas. How much blame is it that the offense couldn't offense?
Oh, so the offense is much different. Your quarterback had a broken throwing hand, and he played.
But not all year.
No, and they won the first 10 games.
Yeah, and then they lost. They lost these games that were terrible losses.
I understand that. He got dinged up against San Francisco, and then they muddled through it because you put Jalen Hurts out there over the backup. I get it. You look at his injuries from that San Francisco moment on, he's the one who got hurt. The second main thing they did not replace last year was Isaac Salamalu, their left guard. They got bought into all the commercial hype that Kelce is the greatest center in the world. He's not. And it came to prove as the year went on, as he started to age out. Kelce will not be a starting center in the league next year. He is the weak spot of that team. And the most overrated part of that team is what I'm about to get in here is that running back room sucks. I mean, there's just no other way around it. They try to run the ball like crazy. Swift has been kicked out essentially of 2 heavy running systems. Maybe at some point we realize Swift is the problem.
But I don't think it's him though, dude. Like
everyone says that, but his results speak for themselves.
Well, I mean, as a Swift lover earlier in the season, though, Joe, you've got to.
I was a Swift lover in the offseason. I thought the new fresh paint would work good for him.
Here's the thing: is that the way that Swift is, I am unsure if it's wholly a talent issue, like reading the schemes or reading anything like that. But how much do they actually want to use this guy? It feels like it's like the Dalvin Cook effect.
This is actually a common thread from Georgia players coming into the league, and no one really articulates this.
Mm-hmm.
To get to Georgia, you have to be the greatest player on every field you've ever been on. That's essentially a given fact. Once you're at Georgia, no one in the league, except for maybe Bama, maybe the Florida and LSU, maybe Tennessee, that's it. So what? Collectively, you play 3 of them a year, even can compare to you. So essentially, by being from Georgia and being in that system, and again, Georgia's doing what they could, getting the best players. I'm not criticizing Georgia at all in the sense that they're recruiting these guys. But the problem is they've never really been tested. And this isn't just a situation here in Philly, but Philly exemplifies it a lot. Their 2 D linemen weren't able to step up when they started playing other real talent. Swift, running back, whose entire college career was just get wide, be faster than everyone, can't do it at the pros. Go to the best receiver Georgia ever had.
But Joe,
can't handle the fact that the ball hit his hands. He can't bring it in George Pickens. It's a common thread through the Georgia personnel that they don't.
I get what you're saying.
Able to develop and fight through challenges.
I get what you're saying.
That's the issue with Swift.
But his yards per carry tell a different story. He's 11th.
When he's
11th in the league.
He's like A-Chain. It's gone.
Right.
But he's not willing to do. He's not fast enough to consistently do that like A-Chain.
But
A-Chain won't be able to do it in 3 years either.
So let's talk a little bit about that what you just brought up here, because it was really outside of the weather one of the reasons why the Miami Dolphins lost that game against the Chiefs.
Miami Dolphins were never going to win that game.
We knew that going into it. We knew that Tua, the narrative was Tua isn't good in cold weather. That was proven to be true, even though Tyreek's played in cold weather before. Tyreek's banged up. But another common thread, because all of these games except for the Detroit Lions-Rams games were blowouts. There was at no one point in time that you realistically thought maybe Cleveland in like the second quarter.
Cleveland had a chance.
You realistically never really thought that any of these other teams had a chance to win the game once they got up that big. Now, Miami's defense played well enough against Patrick Mahomes. They
shut him down. They held 4 different red zone attempts of field goals. That's good enough.
Vic Fangio is a fantastic defensive coach. He might not be able to coach a whole team, but he's a good defensive coordinator. And they did it with all those injuries. One of the biggest injuries, Bradley Chubb. You've got to make more of yourself, and this is what that defense did. Now, I want to bring this up because this is what as going into the show, as we come across and we look at all these things that are coming out, is that the outside run game of Miami worked this year. Miami was able to do a lot outside, and Kansas City, for their effort, they shut that down. And, as we were saying going into the season, I was really down on the Dolphins because I thought Tua might get hurt. Now, Tua didn't get hurt. They ended up making the playoffs. But one of the things that I said, last week is, they found a running game. Well, it was very clear in this game against the Chiefs that they didn't actually find a running game. They actually just found an outside running game, and they don't have the talented
play.
They don't have the talent at that position to run inside. Now, I want to posit that because that's what you brought up about A-Chain, is that DeAndre Swift and every team in the league, outside of teams like that have Christian McCaffrey and Travis Etienne, have to have 2 running backs. They have to have a guy that specifically is really good at or average at both of those things, or a specialist at one of those things.
But the problem is, as soon as you do that, you're telling the defense where it's going.
I understand that, but like we said, if every team had a running back that could do both, then running back wouldn't be as.
There's a reason. There's only one Henry and Peterson in generation.
Yeah, there's a reason. There's a reason for that. So there are players that have to. While you might not be great at running outside, you should be at least moderate at both. And you don't have to be generational. But why I bring that up is that you're talking. We just saw Raheem Mostert have one of the best seasons of a fantasy.
Wait, we're not done with the Eagles yet. We'll get to my opinion.
I'm not done with the Eagles yet, but I'm saying we just had Raheem Mostert have one of the best seasons from a fantasy running back in a couple of years that we've seen. And and it was especially good because you got him in like the 20th round. He wasn't even on people's radar and whatnot. But the reason I bring that up is because, everybody's talking up Mostert, and everybody wants to talk down about DeAndre Swift, but their yards per carry are pretty much similar. So the reason I bring this up is that Gainwell and Boston Scott are almost similar style of player as DeAndre Swift. So
but
in that they only listen. I'm saying they only specialize in one thing. Mm-hmm. Okay, is that for Philadelphia, and this is why the push play is something that's like constantly on people's radar, is that they don't have a guy. They don't have a guy.
You're right.
They can run it through up the middle. They don't have a guy that could take it between the tackles. This is a problem for the Philadelphia Eagles. And I think that it's a problem that if they haven't identified it now, like I said, the problem isn't DeAndre Swift.
That's their second round pick next year. They know it.
DeAndre Swift is a good player, Joe. Like, it's not his fault that he can only do a specific thing. He got over 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns this year. That is not, and he had 4.6. He had the 11th best yards per carry.
The point is, I guess that's what I'm trying to say. DeAndre Swift has been billed as the go-to. He's your offensive solution,
but he hasn't. No, he's never been billed that.
He wasn't at Detroit. All.
No, he hasn't.
Here's the bottom line: when they needed him to be, he's not able to. And since he can't,
I get it.
There is, and this is the key difference between this year and last year.
But they gave up on it.
Was that?
They gave up on it in this game. They absolutely gave up on him.
But, well, they gave up to it earlier in this game. But the issue is, and say what you will about what Sanders did there. Sanders could handle 15-plus carries a game.
But we saw that Sanders is trash.
I get that. The offensive line was much better. But the point is, since you were doing that, you were able to have a consistent play-action game, which Hurts is one of the few that consistently do it. Once that went away, in part due to Hurts' injury, but mostly because you can't do a consistent play-action game on outside zone. You need to be able to do it on a power running play up the middle so your offensive linemen stay in the same place. Because in a zone play, they all kind of shift, and then you get a cutback and go. That is Swift's best play, the zone cutback. But you can't have a pocket
good play
goes like that, or else your linemen go illegal man downfield, play comes back.
Yeah, that is true.
That's the fundamental. It's more of a, as you're saying, a style difference. That's the difference.
But that's a coach thing.
It's a team building thing. I don't know if it's necessarily.
But team building speaks of the coach.
Well, those are the 3 biggest needs this team has going in off season, and they actually are relatively.
Is an identity. They don't have an identity as a team. You can't at any one point
gets healed on Hurts, and Brown is able to run again. They have an identity. It's a first-round pick left guard. It's a second-round pick as a power running back, and a third-round pick as a linebacker, and they're set. Probably hit free agency.
Like I said to you, though, yes, they could go out and get one in the draft. I agree with you 100% that is something that they need to go out and get. They also need to get healthy. But this is a team that even with injuries, we saw them overcome these things last year too. We've seen them be able, and granted,
last year.
Granted, Edwards is good. This was an issue for the defense, but I'm just strictly speaking of the offense here. Is that the abomination that are the losses that they have is, and it's something that when we look at coaches that have that have coached in these playoffs and coaches that we've seen for a long time, guys like Mike Tomlin with the Pittsburgh Steelers, where we say, oh, he's just worried about, he wants to win. The guy wants to win. And unfortunately, sometimes he's saddled with less than stellar talent, sometimes coaching wise and whatnot. We'll get to that in a moment. We'll get to that in a moment.
On the Steelers, this is the point that I want to get to. That's the background behind this. The defense of the Eagles is what drove the Eagles. Everyone thinks it's the offense. It's not. The Eagles were driven by their defense, and
that's what I'm trying to prove. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
Yeah, you can muddle through anything. This is what San Diego has never understood.
That's exactly. This team has the Brandon Staley effect, and this is why I'm saying that Nick Sirianni isn't the guy. If you're going to coach like Staley proved that even with a top-notch or top-tier style of player that Justin Herbert can be, with a star at wide receiver, with multiple stars at wide receivers despite injuries, and with a guy like Eckler who could do everything that you could have possibly asked other than running inside like we want DeAndre Swift to do. Yeah. This team is exactly the same as the Los Angeles Chargers. So, Joe.
So you're looking just through this game last night.
No, I'm looking at the totality of the season. This team
you look at the totality
plays like the Chargers.
Sirianni had a defense that was working, and he played ball. This is why people say it's a high school offense. He was playing ball control offense, and then he let Swift in the beginning of the year. It was not a high school offense. A.J. Brown was the most dynamic receiver in the league, including.
I understand that. I owned him in fantasy football, and that's amazing.
They started getting dinged up. Last night, he looked at his team realistically. I can't get a pass rush. My quarterback can't give me more than 20.
Understood.
I have to possess this ball, and if it didn't work, we're going to lose. So when he went all in for it, it failed, and then they imploded.
But Joe,
that happens in wild card weekend.
Yeah, but we've seen, and this is why I'm so adamant and fired up about this, is that we were calling for Staley's head on a platter for Los Angeles Chargers fans a couple of weeks ago because of that abysmal loss to the Raiders. And
it wasn't just that loss to the Raiders. It was
even the stuff leading up to that. Even the stuff leading up to that, previous seasons, the loss to the Jaguars on that comeback last year in the wild card. The problem that I have with Sirianni and with this entire coaching staff in general is that when, yes, player talent changes, absolutely 100%. Injuries happen, absolutely 100%. But when you're losing a football game in the playoffs and you just stop, They just stopped.
I mean, there's a certain realistic point whenever he has a broken hand. We tried our thing.
Well, then don't play him.
It's not going to come back.
Don't play him if he has a broken hand.
You can't not play him.
Yes, you can. If he is not your best player at this moment in time to allow you to win that football game.
There's no way he's not. You don't develop your. This isn't like college where we're working our software to get ready to start next year. Jalen Hurts will be the starting quarterback in 2029 in Philadelphia.
I'm not disagreeing with that fact. Like I said, I have no issue with Jalen Hurts. I have no issue with a couple of those players on that offense or on that defensive front. There's a couple of talented players on this team. But the way that game was coached yesterday speaks a lot about what Sirianni, without Steichen, and I can't remember what the defensive coordinator was last year, without those two guys, what he actually is. And I just want to bring that up as a possible transition to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers. Is that
Miami?
But we're going to get to Miami.
Sirianni is this. And you see this a lot in wild card games, really any playoff loss. Just
it's the whole season, though.
There's more of them. There's nothing left to play for. There's a certain moment in every game when you know it's over. I mean, you even saw it with Cleveland. It's over. It's done.
Yeah.
So I'm not risking my body for a losing cause.
But Joe, they had Marcus Mariota, Mary Scroats, our favorite backup starting quarterback of all time.
There's also an element of we can't just blatantly quit by
Well,
putting in different personnel.
blatantly quitting was keeping Jalen Hurts in that game. Blatantly quitting. He is.
You're
Joe,
talking about NFL etiquette now in a world that changes every 10
Joe,
minutes. I'm just saying that people get blown out in the playoffs a lot, and it's mostly because once it becomes out of reach, you just accept it, and and the other team's on its own. You want to keep the momentum rolling in the next week.
Okay,
That's how you get blowouts.
Got it. But let's go. Let's just. I just want to stay here for just one more moment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I want to get to this right here. Okay. In the second quarter, they're down 16-9.
Mm-hmm.
This is a winnable game. Winnable game. Then in the third quarter, they're down 25-9. Harder, but not insurmountable, right? Okay. But as that game went on, you could see out of Philadelphia, there was. I mean, you look at their third quarter drive summary right here. Punt, negative 10 yards. Punt, 10 yards. Safety, negative 10 yards. 56 yards on downs because at that point in time, they had to go for it.
Mm-hmm.
Fourth quarter, they had only 2 possessions. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Leading up to that, you scored on consecutive drives in the second quarter. And okay, I don't want to take anything from the Bucs. They played a great game. They played a great game through and through. And, they did not let Philadelphia hold on to the ball at any one point in time. And that's the issue that I was having last night with this, Joe, is that you're telling me Nick Sirianni wants to play a ball control offense, but they weren't even controlling the ball.
No, they weren't. You need to have an offensive line first and foremost.
So that's why I'm calling for this, is that the Philadelphia Eagles as an organization need to rethink these coordinators. And I wouldn't say they need to get rid of Sirianni yet, but I'm saying they need to rethink these coordinators because you have a talented group of players in this organization. And you have a coach that didn't adjust. This game, you can't have 2 drives in the third quarter when you are tankingly losing this game and get negative 20 yards and give up 2
that was the game. There's no doubt about it. That was when Tampa won it.
It is when they won it, but that proves the point.
As maybe Sirianni, he knew what he was dealing with.
But he didn't do anything.
He knows how to build a staff. He's got 2 other head coaches in the league right now.
Joe, but it's like knowing you have a house in a floodplain and not having a sump pump. Okay.
Well, he did at the beginning of the year. It just broke.
But he didn't go and fix it.
You can't go and replace something in week 12.
But you had a guy. I'm not saying Mariota is a good player. I'm just saying that he gives you a better chance when statistically your player is not healthy.
Yeah, I get it, but I honestly say it doesn't matter. If you put Mariota out there, he's just going to throw 3 picks. At least
But then the narrative isn't on Nick Sirianni not being able to coach Barnes. It's on Hurts' injury. It's on Hurts' injury.
I think Sirianni is he knew when they lost to San Francisco that his defensive line was done. And
sounds
his
like giving up to me.
challenge of the offseason is to get those 2 Georgia boys to become all pros.
We'll see next year.
And if they do, that team is going to the Super Bowl again. If the 2 Georgia interior defensive linemen show up, become all pros, playing 50-plus snaps a game, Philadelphia will be in the Super Bowl.
I'm not going to fight you on that, but I think the organization, overall organization,
Eagles, I do not worry about it. I still believe top to bottom it's a better roster than Dallas. And I've gotten fights on that all year. But I still believe it's a better roster top to bottom because the middle and bottom of Dallas is bad. Philadelphia at least has a core.
Yeah. That is.
All right, which next train wreck we going to? Pittsburgh or Miami?
I think we got to go with Miami because, like we said, is that McDaniel, looked like he was that coach, that guy, that dude all year, and then when it came to this game,
until Halloween,
until it came to this game, but it was a point that you that you brought up a while ago about McDaniel and about Miami in general, and you brought it up last week too, is that this is a team that when push came to shove, they couldn't shove back.
Mm-mm.
And this has been an issue with Miami for a long time, is that Miami has had some decent enough teams within the last 20, 25 years. They haven't been great by no means, but they have had some playoff caliber teams occasionally. They've had some really shitty teams too, but occasionally they've had some decent enough teams that as an organization, they get put into positions where, they either draw the hot hand in the playoffs or they draw the hot hand down the road and they don't do anything.
This is the fun. See, Miami's biggest comparison, because it's accurate, is the Chargers. They're both finesse teams that want to look pretty in what they do.
Chargers.
And McDaniels overall had such a curve entering the season with where his brain was and how much smarter he was than everyone. Fine. He was dominant in September.
This organization was great.
I believe it's week 9. You can Google it. When they went to Germany to play Kansas City the first time, they scored 7 offensive points. From that moment forward, when it was blatantly clear whatever intellectual superiority was there, time had eroded in 10 weeks.
Joe,
and they never adjusted. And every single game they were in, I want to show the Miami-Buffalo game in the last week of the year as an example of this. The first drive, they were doing a misdirection play and gashing Buffalo on the ground. They got 3 first downs running the exact same play. They ran that same play 7 more times and got 6 yards total. Buffalo figured it out, and they never readjusted. This is the problem. Either A, the coach is way too smart and can't communicate to his players and they can't do it, or B, he's only a fastball pitcher, and as soon as you figure out that's the only thing he's got, time to take Chaplin out of the game. That's the Dolphins.
I think for Miami, I think one of the things that, granted, in a neutral site, we saw what happened. We saw that the Miami Dolphins would lose to Kansas City
If they could have played that game in Miami, they would have lost.
Now, in this game, one of the things that I do want to talk about is the fact that, the defense for Miami showed that they could do more against Patrick Mahomes. And the defense of Kansas City showed a lot. This defense showed that, they have to carry the load at this point in time in this part of the season. And for Kansas City and Miami, these are 2 teams that should be better. They should be better than what they trotted out on the field. Because granted, the weather did have an impact, but that was not the best game that we've seen in the playoffs, and the weather was bad. But
that no other team really had done to that point against Miami, and they are the team to do it since they had the toy first. They pressed Tyreek Hill, and there were 3 separate times. They were beautiful plays that the receiver was getting pressed, Tyreek was getting pressed, and the corner put him on his ass before Tua even dropped back all the way. That they put Tyreek.
It's a great defense.
And you saw the second time it happened was in the early part of the third quarter. Tyreek never got open again.
Yeah.
The whole team, basically, their will was broken. It might have froze, but they wouldn't have won that game even in Miami. Kansas City attacked Tyreek Hill without any fear. Part of that is if he gets one over the top, who cares? We have Patrick Mahomes. The upside of taking him out of this game is immeasurable. And oh, by the way, Waddle was non-existent. And
I thought he was hurt because he didn't I didn't see him at all.
So when you look at this, Miami is in a world of problem long term. Yes, they will win you September and through week 6.
Are they the Dallas Cowboys? Are they the Dallas Cowboys of the AFC right now?
That's exactly what they are, except with a coach that people don't hate yet, but they should.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, if I got to ask you this question, because we spoke about this with Philadelphia. If somehow, if Miami is able to get an inside running game, how scary long term does this Miami team look with a premier outside running back and an inside runner? How
From a running
scary does
perspective,
this look?
very scary. From a passing perspective, none, because Tua still can't make a second read.
I mean,
so that was
I don't want
that's
to
the real
spew
answer
that hate.
behind the math of why didn't it work. They took Tyreek out of the game. The offense stopped.
But
They just showed
why I
you
asked
you
that
have
though,
the courage to attack
Okay.
Tyreek at the line of scrimmage. The offense doesn't work.
So
Tua can't do a progression.
what do you? So if you're Miami, and your offseason has now started, if you are Miami and you look at this game and you say, okay, well, obviously McDaniel's staying, obviously all the sum of our parts is pretty much staying put. I don't know the exact contract situations and free agency and stuff like that. Your number, you had Mostert put up a really great season. Jeff Wilson is non-existent. You have Devin A-Chain on a rookie deal. You go out there and say you go in the draft or you make a big splash in free agency. You go out and get an inside running back or somebody that can move the ball between the tackles, and say you upgrade your third wide receiver because Chosen Anderson, Braxton Berrios
what they'll do.
are not their guys.
Miami
Do
is
you think they come back in the same situation as they're in next year? Do you think that McDaniel is the type of coach that is going to say, I remember that. I'm passionate about what I do, and I remember that, and I'm not going to let that happen again, and coaches Tua up? Or do you think that in 2 years' time, when Tua's contract with the Miami Dolphins will probably be expiring?
Well, he's in the fifth-year option this year, so you have to give him an extension this year.
Yeah, because next year and then the year after, that's 2 years, right? So
he's in his fourth year now. He gets the extension for next year. That's why they got to give him a real contract.
Right, I know that, but by the time we're talking about this again, it will be next year. It'll be 2026.
He will already have had the contract at that point.
Yeah. So what I ask you is the issue for Miami going into the offseason? Is it a talent level more, or is it a coaching concern for you?
So this is why Miami's in trouble. They are able to write off in their minds, so much of our defensive front was hurt, we don't need to worry about it. They need to dramatically increase that. For as good as that offense was, this team should have been a mile ahead in total sacks. And they weren't even close.
Well, all their sack getters were out that game.
I get it. So that's what they're going to say. They're going to say, oh, everyone healthy will be fine. But they have two fundamental flaws. A, they're not as good as you think they are. And B, they don't have the longevity effect. So you look at the way that this team is running and operating, it's all about make the big splash now and be great while it's warm. Well, when you live in Miami and it's 69 degrees right now and the entire rest of the country is covered in a foot of snow, if you can see it outside my window, it doesn't work in the reality of the playoffs unless you get home field. But you only get that if you win your division. And by the way, all you had to do was win, 2 of your last 5 games? And they couldn't do it. This team had an implosion equal in par to Philadelphia. All Philadelphia had to do was win a couple games at the end, and they couldn't do it. Just we don't give it the same kind of oomph because they were blowing out really bad teams at the beginning of the year.
So,
and say what you will about the Broncos, they figured things out. They were a train wreck in the beginning. In Miami, if you were a train wreck, will make you look horrendous. They will beat Bama versus a D2 school.
For that question, Joe, I want to let you elaborate this bit on the lens through Tyreek Hill here, is that Tyreek Hill has the option to potentially be out of Miami in 2025.
So next offseason.
Next offseason when he's 30. Next year he'll be playing. He'll be 30, and it'll be 2024. The year after will be 2025. He potentially can opt out or whatever what they want to say. But technically speaking, he's a free agent come 2027. Now,
so he's got a player option at 2025.
What do they need? So for Miami, a pathway for Miami to win a Super Bowl. And if you're a Miami fan, you want to win a Super Bowl. Every fan base wants to win one. We know that this offense went through Tyreek Hill so much this year. And Tyreek Hill is that guy in terms of a player that is talented, that will allow you to win games because he will be better. But from your point that you've made earlier in the year, there is a point in time where every player starts to break down. And we have seen injuries pile up for Tyreek Hill. We've seen, especially later in the season, these injuries piling up in games that, he needs to play and they don't have him. Where is it then that the Miami Dolphins do with a guy like Jaylen Waddle? Where is it then did they need to develop a guy to take over this role for Tyreek and help him in a way that, Tyreek's a guy that wants to have all the accolades. I get that. Like he deserves it. But, we have seen him leave a guy like Patrick Mahomes. I gotta say, I mean, Kansas City isn't a city I want to live in, but, opting out from a generational quarterback to go to Miami for more money, it seems to me that Tyreek wants that.
Let's like
right.
choice.
I get it, but like there is going to be a point in time where once that chance to, be a free agent or opt out or whatever comes to mind, because this isn't really like the NBA, but when you have a chance. Who are they going to? What are they going to do to replace him?
First, from Tyreek's perspective, in which what you're hitting on there, I highly doubt that he opts out. For two main reasons. I believe the amount of money that he will be given there will be greater than what he'd be able to get.
Oh, it's absurd.
Well, yeah, it'll be greater than what he'd be able to get in the free agent market. For the simple fact is he's already losing a step.
His base salary in 2026 will be $43 million.
Exactly. And at that point, Miami is going to have to give him another deal where some of that will become guaranteed just so they're not in cap hell. So as a result, he ain't leaving South Beach. So I want to operate under that starting realistic fact. And I also want to move with the assumption that Tua is going to remain their quarterback. And I think that that's probably the fair way of moving forward. If I were them, I would get myself a Tyreek insurance policy. I would draft someone that old school Al Davis would have loved. I'm not using a first round pick on him, but I'm going to draft like a Shaheed that's down in New Orleans. Someone who can.
Or you could actually just go and get Shaheed.
No, I'd get a new fresh one because most of them break. It's the story of the San Francisco running backs, which is amazing. Mostert didn't get hurt as much as he did. So I would go get another one so that even if Tyreek loses step or goes out, you at least have the other off the field pressure of it. I would also, if I were them, get a power middle running back and go with there. But most of all, and this is the part that I think will always be their regulatory and hurt them, I would want to build my team and prepare it to win games like 17-10. And there is no mindset that team would ever be willing or capable to play AFC North football. Until and it's a grit mentality thing. They live with the mindset that, we don't need to get this sack right now to force the punt because worst case scenario, Tyreek's going to go score a touchdown in 7 minutes anyway. That's the difference between the AFC North and Miami.
Speaking
There's
of grit,
pressure that I have to get off the field now.
Speaking of grit,
that's what Cleveland lost, but side story.
Speaking of grit, I want to get to that game, Cleveland and Houston. And this is a game where we saw what we thought was going to be a decent game turn into a slaughter. And it was very obvious from the second quarter on that Houston had the reins of that game, and they weren't going to let go of what was happening there.
I was still in it though in the third quarter though.
I get it, but I was coming back. We were actually at a restaurant when that game was on, and we just sat down to eat because we were coming back from the shower, and the game was on, and that's when I started texting you. I was like, oh my God, like what? And you're like, oh, don't worry, the Cleveland Browns are still in it. And then they threw 2 pick sixes.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is a Joe Flacco thing. And we've known that this is a Joe Flacco thing. This is why Joe Flacco isn't a starting quarterback in the NFL. But it's also one of the reasons that we were excited about Joe Flacco going into this game, because we know he's a gunslinger. We know he's going to be competitive. We know he's a competitive player. He's always going to try to have the best interests of the offensive mind, and he's going to try to push the ball down the field. He did that, but it didn't work. And so, we talked up Cleveland last week, and we both thought Cleveland was going to win. And we both thought Cleveland, was going to win at least by 7 to 10 points, if not a little bit more. And
Cleveland could run on them. I mean, that was the fun. The Cleveland could not run the ball.
Yeah, and Houston showed up. And that was one of the things going into that game that we looked at, and we said, the narrative is these young quarterbacks against these veterans. Young quarterbacks tend to not do as well in the playoffs. But they did. They won, except for Tua and Mason Rudolph. And so you look at it and you say, hey, Houston's offense, this offense that Houston is trotting out on a week-to-week basis, they put Noah Brown on IR, and I don't, they're not getting Dell back anytime soon. But this offense run through Nico Collins and run through with CJ Stroud, this looks like a very good offense. And remember, going back to that conversation we had last week, we said that there were going to be turnovers in this game. We did say that Joe Flacco would turn the ball over in this game. And the question was, how would Houston respond? How could Houston take that and what would they do with it? Because at least I thought, and I think you thought as well, that Cleveland would be able to produce some turnovers against CJ Stroud, at least get him to turn the ball over with an interception and then turn those into points. But the opposite happened. Houston was the one that turned those into points. So the question that I posit to you right now, going against Baltimore in the coming week, do you see this Houston offense as being productive? And then do you see this Houston defense with now that sliver of, we can cause turnovers and we can make this lead from our offense even better? Do you think that they walk into that game against Lamar Jackson and throw together a game plan that will say that relies on that turnover? Or do you think they stay tried and true to what they've done all year, which is just kind of choking people out as much as they can while putting up as many points as they can? Because CJ Stroud looks like the real deal.
I would agree. So let me put it this way. Houston is the team Miami should grow up to become, but Miami won't. Houston is a physical team that can put up points. Now, Grant, you're exactly right. They got the turnovers, but they got turnovers because of Flacco. And I don't think that you can expect that from Lamar in the same way. I think that the number one reason of optimism that you should have in Houston to potentially go and pull the upset is they stopped the run, and they did run the ball against a team that was top 5 in both of those respective categories against Cleveland. Cleveland did not let people run on them at all this year.
Did you see that weird stat, though? Did you see that really strange stat about Jim Schwartz-led defense this year? Is that they had I think it was the 5th worst defensive rating in the red zone. And to me, for a defense that was as good as Cleveland had been all year, that was an alarming stat.
Well, they just don't get in the red zone. They don't let you in.
Right. And that was wild. But this Baltimore
part of that is also a lot of, because they allow so few people in the red zone, when garbage time gets in there, it has a much bigger skew.
Yeah, I guess that's right.
So that's the problem with percentage stats.
But that whole second half of that game was just dominated. It absolutely, they did not.
Once Flacco threw the first pick 6, they basically mentally checked out.
Right.
They felt they weren't coming back. And I get it. When he threw the second one, that absolutely was affirmative.
Absolutely.
So part of it was, I knew Flacco was going to throw a pick. I just didn't. The whole question was, what was Houston going to do with it? Well, they took it to the house.
Right.
I thought if it came to the offense coming on the field, that Cleveland's defense would have been able to shut out post turnover. So I don't think that in the long run here, Houston is going to be radically changing things. But the thing that I loved about them is they did something that few coordinators in the league to do. Maybe only about a third of them are willing to do. They literally just said, "That's my bitch," and then they just kept attacking Newsom, and they just kept going at him and going at him and going at him. Another great guy who does that is Shanahan. Just that guy can't do it. We're going to attack him all day. And as a result, it's definitely the career low light of Newsom's film, or Nelson rather, his film there. He couldn't cover him.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at this, when you scheme people to get the matchups you want, it is an incredible advantage. As much as I hated Bruce Arians as an offensive coordinator for the Steelers, that's what he was amazing at. That's how you get to the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
You find a hole and you keep exploiting it. Cleveland could not adjust to it. And given that starting point, I do believe that they're going to find multiple holes in the Baltimore defense, some name brands that are overrated, Queen, and go at them. And at the fundamental starting point, if you can run the ball the way they did, it gives you opportunity to find and attack those patterns earlier and better. Now, granted, in Houston's perspective, they had an entire game to figure out how to do that when they lost to Cleveland earlier in the year. Because Cleveland didn't really change that much up. But when you look at what they're doing against Baltimore, it's, are we going to be able to find the spot? Now, granted, they played Baltimore too. This is another rematch game. So will they be able to identify that spot? I give Houston a much greater chance than the current odds are at 9.5 to win this game. A much greater chance. I personally believe the spread should be only 3. I think that at this game, Houston, I dare to say, even though he's going to win the league MVP, I think I have more optimism moving forward with Stroud than I do with Lamar. Stroud throws a better ball than Lamar. That is a fact. And he's not showing any of the fear and the panic that you get out of rookies. If you look at the guy got drafted one slot before him, Stroud's the real deal. Like I said earlier, I'd rather be in a situation of looking at the quarter of all the quarterbacks not playing right now, including Herbert. I want to go with Stroud.
So, Joe, this is something to bring up too, is that when they played the Ravens, that was the first game of the season, and there was a lot of, and this was Stroud's coming out, didn't throw any touchdowns, didn't turn the ball over in that game, and you look at it and you say, all right, well, he's done a lot of development so far this year. His team is much better.
It's a different team.
And Lamar's development, as it goes for a veteran quarterback of his caliber and ranking, there is only so much higher or so much different that he can do, and it's up to the talent of his surrounding cast. So I want to put this to you: is that this Houston defense now, where we have, they're not, like I said last week, they're not particularly great, but when given the opportunity, they are very good. And they can do a lot, but again, they don't do a lot very, very well. But this is a coach, in your head coach, that is a defensive-minded coach, particularly in the linebacker with D'Amico Ryans. And so you look at it and you say, okay, I'm going to go out and try to get the best out of this crew of linebackers. But again, when you have a guy that your best offensive weapon on the Ravens is obviously Lamar Jackson, and then you step it down from that, and you say, well, Zay Flowers' game is all in the intermediate and short. Zay Flowers' game is all there. And you have OBJ that you feel like sometimes OBJ can't run deep. And then you have guys like Nelson Aguilar, Rashad Bateman that can get open deep. There is a pathway for the Texans to win this game if they play a sound defensive game and cause no turnovers. What is the pathway here then for the Ravens? Because offensively, it seems like that at least CJ Stroud can keep pace with this offense. So defensively, where is it at here for the Ravens that if they want to win this game, what is the script? What do they have to do, and when do they have to do it?
So first, let me start by complimenting one of the big things with the Ravens. And I think this is also a testament to the other super genius down in Miami, is that they had a game plan from the offseason on of how to transform this offense. The Ravens did. And this is, you see,
it was firing that offensive coordinator that sucked. That was the
they did in the offseason. And you saw each week consistent changes, not just adding one play here and then riding it until it doesn't work anymore, but a consistent schematical growth out of the Ravens over really the span of the year, but most of the heavy implementation until about week 12.
Mm-hmm.
And then what you saw, which if you look at their schedule, was their matchup against Cincinnati. That was when they wanted everything fully in effect for. Which makes sense if you're the Ravens. Cincinnati had won the division the year before. Get ready for it. And what you saw was a growth and accelerant of there, which the other advantage means that you really haven't shown your full hand yet. You knew you were making the playoffs. You knew you were going to have a strong team with Baltimore. So in terms of pathway for Ravens to win this game, I mean, there's a reason they're a 9.5-point favorite. Lamar Jackson is the league MVP. This defense is amazing. I would argue I'd rather have it than Cleveland's, even though there's weaker spots on it. Baltimore's lows are lower than Cleveland's, but as a unit, they hide them with pressure so incredibly well because you put on pressure, it doesn't matter that my number 2 corner can't cover. You can't get the ball to him.
Right.
And you multiply that by the fact that Lamar's going to score. I mean, he's scoring. So therefore, you have that mentality building up. And this is exactly what Dallas had all year from a defensive perspective. You have to have panic. And what did you see with Dallas? How did you beat them? You ran at them so the pass rush couldn't do anything. Because if you're running, pass rush is irrelevant. So if you are the Ravens, stop their run. Make them one-dimensional and make them have to get into a shootout with you and then just trust the MVP over the rookie. It's a very logical.
Do you think Dallas's defense can cause enough pressure on Lamar to do the opposite?
Do I think Baltimore's or Houston's defense can do that? No. And this goes back to something we said earlier about the plexiglass theory. They were so bad defensively in basically everything last year with Black Santa Claus. And now this year, they took a giant step forward. Yeah, sorry, blanked on his name.
That was 2 years ago.
A giant step forward, and it's very hard to sustain that growth. Now, granted, it's still in the year, so when you're riding through the wave, normally you keep the momentum going to the end. It's just going to be very hard. That being said, I am 100% taking Houston in the 9.5 points.
That's a lot of points for a good offensive team.
It's going to be a close game. I give Houston a reasonable chance of winning it, not the favorite by any stretch. And like I said, there are ways. You attack Marcus Peters if you're looking at that offense, and you do it ideally with Collins, you'll get some big plays on Baltimore. If, and this is the giant if that has protected them the whole year, you can get the ball out, which normally you can't against the Ravens. I mean, that's how the AFC North was built. It's also a testament to how overrated Garrett was.
So let's go.
Be able to keep that from happening.
So let's go to this other game featuring the NFC North with our Pittsburgh Steelers here against Buffalo. It's a game that was pushed back while we were talking about this game leading up to it. We said the weather would be a great equalizer with TJ Watt, with TJ Watt's injury. This was the first game back with Minkah Fitzpatrick, Mason Rudolph starting, and things did not start off well. The game got pushed back to Monday. The weather was no longer a factor.
You really didn't, though.
The weather wasn't a factor, but the Steelers came out flat. And to begin that game, is there a word higher than flat to describe what that offense, what it looked like at the start of this game?
That's the wrong way of looking at it. I think the Pittsburgh Steelers came out thinking they were going to be able to run the ball no matter what, and Buffalo manned up more than the Steelers did. They were just more physical, and the very first drive, you could tell they just wanted Najee to take the game over. Buffalo
and that didn't happen.
In that drive to 2 carries for 4 yards, and when you look at it, it then basically be from Buffalo's defensive standpoint, it's exactly what you should do. We're going to take out the running game and try to have their third string quarterback beat us. It's a very logical thing when you say it out loud.
And when you look at it, it was working good. But to his credit, Mason Rudolph in that game
wasn't the problem. The receiver
wasn't the issue.
Yeah,
I mean, and he hasn't been the issue for the Pittsburgh Steelers for the last several weeks of the season. He's actually been the saving grace. And so I want to talk about this, talk a little bit about Buffalo moving forward but also about the Steelers in the offseason here, is that there's not really a decision they have to make, but they do have to make. It's a couple different decisions. The reason why I say it's not really a decision they have to make, but they do, is this whole Kenny Pickett thing. And I'm ready. I'm ready to be a Kenny Pickett supporter, but there's nothing there that's really wanting me to. I mean, I got the shirts. I've gone to the strip district. I bought the shirts. I'm ready. I'm there. I'm willing to invest. And the reason I bring this up is going back to the Packers and their organization is that, three quarterbacks, this is a Steelers type of thing too, where the Steelers only get that quarterback and then they ride that quarterback until that quarterback goes in the sunset, is that we are in a drastically, and I say we as Pittsburgh Steelers fans are in a drastic turn of events here, where we've come out of a generation legacy, legendary Hall of Fame style quarterback in Ben Roethlisberger, whose waning years weren't as good as his prime years. But you look at it and you say, the Pittsburgh Steelers, they've got the parts, they've got the grit, they've got attitude, but they don't have it all in the right places. Mm-hmm. And Tomlin's probably coming back for another year. That's what he says. All the media in Pittsburgh is like calling for his head and saying, he needs to go. But without lack of better options out there, you keep a guy that is a winning quarterback or a winning coach to an organization. So, Joe, I know you're chomping at the bit here to go in at me on something, but I want to ask you, as a guy who likes Mason Rudolph, mm-hmm. and as fans who enjoy watching the Pittsburgh Steelers play, this was a tough loss. It wasn't a loss that we knew wasn't going to happen, but it's also one where year after year the Steelers have snaked their way into playoffs, and year after year they've disappointed under Mike Tomlin. And so I want to ask you, what's the solution here for the Pittsburgh Steelers? Because the offseason, there's players' contracts that are going to be up. There's players that are going to have to heal from injuries. And there's a big quarterback situation that they have to solve because of the way that Rudolph has looked at the end of this year. And you don't want to pay him because you got Kenny Pickett under contract, with a good salary. Where is this team at next year? Because as a fan, I'm concerned in a lot of different ways.
Well, you should be. So the Steelers have put themselves in a very bad spot offensively. Starting point here. So we look at this and say, hey, prior for riding the Steelers journey, for all of us in Steelers Nation who did this, prior to Mason entering the game, the Steelers were at one point essentially guaranteed the playoffs. Mm-hmm. And then they have 3 horrendous losses that, for all intents and purposes, the mindset became, even if this team makes the playoffs, we don't want them in there because they're not going to be able to do anything.
Right.
And then they throw in Trubisky, who is the epitome of that train wreck. That happened during that time. And then Mason shows up and starts making the offense look right because we push the ball vertically downfield, and then the running game magically opens up. It's funny how that works. You don't run with 8 men in the box. You can do it.
George Pickens and Deontay Johnson looked good again.
Started pushing the ball downfield. And the end result was that you then believe, okay, this offense has authority and got better. Well, the reason Mason was in there was because Kenny was hurt. Well, Kenny was healthy in the Baltimore game, the final regular season game. Steelers chose not to use him. They'd rather go with their third-string quarterback. Playoff game, same answer. That third-string quarterback is a free agent and was told twice that he was going to have a chance to battle for the starting position. And in both situations, no realistic chance was ever given. So from that quarterback's perspective, being Mason, there is no reason on this planet I would trust them a third time that I would get a chance. So therefore, there is no reasonable expectation to think that Mason Rudolph, it's possible to be in the Steelers' future. You then turn to their front office situation. Mike Tomlin has 1 year left. You cannot hire a successful offensive coordinator to a lame duck. It has never worked anywhere in the league. Steelers Nation has no idea about this, but it's a fact. No lame duck quarterback has ever successfully hired a staff. This is why you see so many coaches get fired with time back on their tenure. They can't get someone. Well, you have now just told whoever the new coordinator or coach is, you have to come use this first round pick that we don't even believe in.
Right.
Pittsburgh Steelers have basically not just from their movement said they already don't believe in Kenny Pickett. They basically told you that we've given free right that the new guy has to be able to replace him. So when you look at this team from an overall standpoint, they are in the problem that their legacy defensive player in Cam Hayward is probably aged out if he doesn't retire outright. You have a fact that TJ Watt, we cannot win a game without him. Not necessarily say you're guaranteed to win with him, but you're guaranteed to lose without him. They're now 1-11 when TJ Watt doesn't play. And missing 12 games over a span of 6 years is not super concerning, but it's regular. So that's something you need to note. And as you move forward and go, there were some bright spots on this team. Right. But until you fix the fact that both of your receivers are divas and unwarranted because they do not have any statistics to back them. They are not Randy Moss putting up the Hall of Fame career. They might look like Randy in one of their cases, but they aren't. And the other one is unwilling to take a hit until the playoffs start. It's like watching a minor league hockey player think that he can start being relevant, hitting people for the first time in his career as soon as April starts. So when you look at this, they're in a tremendously difficult situation in their wide receiver room, obviously at quarterback. Because, oh, by the way, just like no coach wants to come here, there's no receiver signing here either. Because who's going to come and have Kenny, who's panicking in the pocket, throwing the ball? And this is the other part you have to look at. Sure, Kenny got hurt, but he still put up 10-plus games worth of tape. And what this tape showed was a quarterback who was afraid of getting hit, a quarterback that scrambles with one scramble move that got discovered, and a guy who became less accurate as the year went on. So you add all that up, you do not have an NFL prospect, let alone an NFL starter. So there is no reasonable justification.
So what do you do?
For what do you do? You hope that either Penix comes available to you and you make sure you get one of these supposed 5 first-round quarterbacks. Even
do they have the assets to do that?
Well, you don't, but when there's 5 of them, you tend to get them to drop back. Remember, Mahomes was the 3rd quarterback pick in his draft, and Kansas City traded up to, I believe, 12th to do it. They were in the playoffs the year before, lost in the wild card weekend, just as the Steelers are now. If you believe that one of these guys can be there, can be the next one, you go and get them. And you trade up to whoever has it. Especially if it's a team right there in the middle of the road that doesn't know how to do anything with quarterbacks, but loves having draft capital in their new regime, and they got a Hall of Famer who just hasn't died yet named the New York Jets. Trade up with them, go get the real quarterback of the future, and then stain both franchises moving forward. So let's to answer the Bills game itself, the Steelers were in that game essentially until Joey Porter Jr. got hurt. Because the second Joey Porter Jr. got hurt, the Buffalo Bills were able to shred apart the offense. They started running the ball effectively, and they started getting Diggs involved. Prior to Porter going out of that game, Diggs did nothing.
Diggs had like 25 yards.
Yeah. So when you look at this, what Porter was able to do against other teams' number 1 receivers has been remarkable as a rookie. You have a very good pass rush, no linebackers to speak of. But from the Steelers' perspective, you get a new quarterback, you get a new center, and you get another safety who doesn't get ejected from every game, then you start building from there. So and you probably try to rebuy middle linebackers again in free agency.
So then with the Buffalo Bills here, we've got another rematch, Buffalo Bills, Kansas City Chiefs going into this week. These are 2 teams that when on their best days are 2 of the best teams in the league. And so these are 2 teams that have both found defenses in the last several weeks. And, you know, it seems like they both understand the gravity of their situations in that you have generational talent at quarterback. You have coaches, Andy Reid, Hall of Famer, but I forget his name up in Buffalo. McDermott. It's time to put up or shut up if you're the Buffalo Bills. And with this game, it feels like Buffalo has, at least right now, a decent enough pathway to do it. Josh Allen hasn't been turning over the ball in the last several weeks like he had been earlier in the year. Gabe Davis, dinged up, and you relying a little bit more on Shakir. Diggs has been non-existent for the most part over the last several weeks, except for this coming out again in the playoffs with 7 receptions. And you say to yourself, this sounds a lot like Kansas City's offense. That there's a lot that these two teams have in common, but the one denominator that's missing for the Chiefs is, this difference between Rice versus Diggs, right? Is that you have Rice, who is a guy that we both like. Diggs is another guy that we both like. Rice is on the come up. How do you feel this game is going to shake down? Because talent-wise on offense, it seems like outside of that number one option, they both have stellar tight ends. They both have a good running game. Pacheco being a little bit better in my mind than Cook. Offensive lines are what they are. Jawan Taylor always constantly getting penalties for the Chiefs. And we know that the refs usually like to call the calls in favor of the Chiefs for the most part in games like this. Where do you see Buffalo at? Does Buffalo win this game this week? And if they do win this game, how do you see them winning it?
Well, first off, you can't have the thriller in Manila unless Joe Frazier wins at least once. So I do believe that in this case, Frazier being Allen, they want him to beat Mahomes. They wanted this to actually be a rivalry. You can't have a one-sided rivalry. So in that regards, I do believe that the NFL has a vested interest in getting Buffalo to win this game. Just from a side story. But in all factuality, I believe that when you look at this, Kansas City has probably the most overrated defense just because Tony Romo is absolutely in love with Steve Spagnuolo. And he blitzes along third down. And
they've looked good.
It's a blitz protection scheme. They really cannot long-term cover. They have to blitz their way out of problems, which is another way of saying we really don't have a consistent pass rush because we have to constantly blitz. It's a defense that has holes that they try to schematically hide, which, hey, as a defensive coordinator, it's what you're supposed to do. It's your job. But it still means there's holes. And when I look at Buffalo, yes, the disappearance of where has Stephon Diggs gone is very concerning to me. I just talked about how good Porter was, yes. But even before that, Diggs disappeared. And you can make the argument, last 2 weeks, it was Porter, it was Ramsey. It's hard to get open against those guys. True, obviously. But Diggs needs to become present. There's just no way around that. And
he's going to go up against Snead, who's very, very good.
Yes, that is true. And this is where I'm going to say, I was wrong about this in the preseason, really on 2 players, but I'm going to focus on Kincaid in this one. Rookie tight end developed at a much better rate than I expected. And when you look at Kincaid, he is stepping into the role of he's their number 2 receiver. And this is a trend going across the league to kind of step it back and look at the league as a whole. There are now 3 prominent teams that a tight end is their number 2, being Buffalo, Dallas, and Detroit. All 3 of them, the tight end is their number 2 receiver.
Well, Kansas City,
Kansas City's their number 1 receiver.
Yeah, not recently, but
into their number 2 receiver. But in Kansas City, he's their number 1. So I bring that up because Kansas City can't really cover the middle of the field that well. They just don't. But no one really tries it the way that they should. So where Buffalo's great advantage is that Cook has accepted the fact I'm not a speed outside scat guy. I'm going to try to run the middle. So does Allen. So the defense has to cheat the running lanes up the middle more so than you do against a Miami defense, for instance, or Tony Pollard Dallas offense. You can't. It's not cheating the outside; it's cheating the middle. So that leaves the hole than for Kincaid or Knox, who's also very good at this, to exploit it. And when you put them both out there, it puts a lot of strain on those linebackers.
You could easily see 6 receptions from Kincaid in this matchup.
Yeah, no, I think both of the linebackers or both of the tight ends for Buffalo are good plays against these linebackers. So when you look at what Buffalo can do, I really think that we're going to see who's going to run the ball better as being the battle here. And we just saw Buffalo shut down, which was the second best rush offense since week 9. They just shut them down. There's no Pittsburgh had no chance running the ball against them.
No, they didn't.
And when you look at this and go, well, Pacheco's nowhere near that. The Kansas City run offense is nowhere near that. So do we have to worry about now Mahomesing it up? Well, everyone knows that Kelsey.
Every year you have to worry about that.
Yeah. But what Buffalo has for them is they have 2 great safeties. And safeties are who take out tight ends. So when you look at this and say, do they wish Milano was there? Absolutely. He's Buffalo's starting middle linebacker. But I see this being a Buffalo victory and probably a Buffalo cover. It's not my official bet, but it's only a 2.5-point spread. That's the way I'd be leaning. Because as good as Mahomes is, we have seen this year that if he ain't getting his way, he kind of becomes a child. And
yeah, that's something.
A concerning fact. It's a concerning fact that any other player in the league gets it. It shouldn't be written off because Mahomes.
Right. Well, I'm not like we all know that he is the epitome of good coaching, great talent, legendary style of resume his first couple of years in the league. But the issues that we have seen over the last couple of weeks, and especially when they're losing, is a player that has thrown fits. We've seen George Pickens do this for the Steelers, throwing fits when things don't go your way, yelling at your offensive linemen, doing all that stuff. And we've seen from earlier in the year, Josh Allen had a little bit of a dust up with Diggs and all this other stuff, and so. These are 2 quarterbacks that are much loved by the NFL, by fan bases, because they give their teams, they are these generational talent kind of players with big arms, the ability to make plays when there's no plays there. These are great quarterbacks. But the issue that I'm foreseeing here in a game of this magnitude, because it has not only the playoff magnitude, but it does have what you talked about earlier, is that rivalry magnitude. This is a game we've seen before. Josh Allen hasn't won in the playoffs against Mahomes, all that narrative stuff, which does play into the psyche of players. It doesn't play into their talent, but it definitely plays into their psyche. So you look at it and you say, if Mahomes is losing, let's say in the third quarter, are we going to get that childlike complaining disposition?
No, I don't think you'll get it from Mahomes.
Or are we going to get the drive? Or are we going to get his drive that says this guy?
While there's still time left on that clock. That's what makes him different from this category. So I don't have any worry about that. Where I worry about is I don't think they're going to be able to run the ball enough on them, and it's going to come down to Mahomes. But
we know when it comes down to Mahomes, though, that's the best player in the league to have it come down to.
But this is going to be the problem, and this is going to be the issue, is that their right tackle is the most penalized player in the league.
Oh, God, he's so bad.
And he's going to get Von Miller on him.
Oh, my God.
So that to me is going to be the fundamental issue. How many plays does Mahomes make to actually get brought back? Now, granted, they call less penalties in the playoffs. It's the nature of the beast. But also, no one's stupid. They realize they're not calling stuff. You start to get a little extra chippy against the line. And Buffalo's defensive line is much deeper than Kansas City's offensive line, and they already start better than them. So I see them wearing them down, and I just see Buffalo winning this. I mean, I just do.
So moving off of this game, let's talk about the only game that was even remotely close at all. For reasons that we said last week, this was the game that, you could waffle on who was going to win it, but it pretty much had the script written for it, what was going to happen in this game. And we're speaking specifically of Detroit versus the Rams right now. Last week I said, one of the things that worried me was this disposition of Dan Campbell to go for it when, it coming out of the gate in the second half, the words that came out of his mouth, I texted you. It says, we just have to make more turnovers. We just have to get more turnovers. And I got nervous. And I thought, well, this is going to change the entirety of this game. We're going to see what happens here. If you're a Lions fan, thankfully that didn't change much of what the Lions were doing. But the Rams still had a chance to win this game late. They still had a chance. Going from last week, what I said was, if the Detroit Lions aren't up by 13 by the third quarter, this is going to be a nail biter. This is going to be a game where you could lose this game if you're Detroit. Watching this game and seeing Puka Nacua just show out and show off.
Yes, he did.
And seeing Kupp kind of be saddled in, and we saw this good rush defense of the Detroit Lions being able to stop Kyren Williams, which was a defining factor in this game, I think, of why the Rams didn't win this game, is because they could never get Kyren going. And Dan Campbell, for, all of the things that people might have said about him.
Either, for that matter.
Say that again?
They never got Kupp going either.
No, they never got Kupp going, but Puka certainly got going
Ooh,
to the tune of all of, what was it, 170 yards, 160 yards, something like that. So it was kind of absurd. Then Amon-Ra St. Brown started getting going late in this game. And Sam Laporta was playing. And we said that as of last, when we were talking about it last week, we didn't know if Sam Laporta was going to play. And we said that would be a defining characteristic in that not only is if they're able to stop Kyren, but is Sam Laporta going to play in this game? And although hobbled, he played. And that was a big difference maker in this game for Goff. Not only that, Aiden Hutchinson got after the Rams. The whole defense caused pressure on the Rams. Stafford probably was concussed at one point in time in this game and was sent back out onto the field. Took a really hard hit. I believe it was in the second quarter, early third quarter, somewhere in there. And he put him back out on the field. And I want to just ask you this, is that
was a shoulder injury, dude. When he went off the field 1 out of 10, that wasn't a
Oh, yeah. But I mean, when he went down, it looked much different than what it actually was. I thought it was shoulder.
Someone who separated his shoulder before. That was a shoulder.
But so here's the point I want to ask you. Here's the point I want to ask you is that this week, we have Green Bay going to the Niners, correct?
Yes.
And we have the Bucs versus the Lions. What's the story? What do the Lions have to do to make it to the next championship game here? Because as a Lions fan, I don't want to talk about it. I want to keep my mouth shut
for
so that I don't screw anything up.
Championship is straightforward. They need to win and the Niners need to lose. So the thing that Detroit did very well that's kind of going under the radar was they played a very methodical style of game, which you don't normally get for explosive offenses. In the first half, both teams only had the ball 3 times for real possessions. I'm not counting the kneeing in at the end of the half. You only had it 3 times each. And that was because both of them, despite the fact that they can put up points, were okay with long drives and not forcing it downfield, which was the fear and concern for all Detroit, right? Dan Campbell's going to force them to do something stupid. They didn't. And if you are Detroit, even though it's the incredibly unsexy part of the story, it's what you need to lean into. Because if you sit on the clock, you have the ball 3 possessions, just like last game. You have the ball 3 possessions, you score on all 3 of them, and you only give Tampa the ball 3 times, they ain't scoring on all 3. So now you're going to go into halftime up by at least 10, and you're going to have a Baker Mayfield panic in the second half. That part's pretty easy to project, and I am projecting that. The issue for them hosting the championship game is strictly the day before in San Francisco. The San Francisco offense is amazing at putting out different options.
Right.
And as limited as Brock Purdy is with his arm, which he is amazing at read progression. It is his best power. He is so much further along than the 5th pick overall.
Like a superhero. Yeah.
And when you look at this, it's going to be incredibly hard, despite the fact that all of Green Bay's players are first-round picks on defense, to stick with the coverage required that the Niners are going to bring to the
So
game.
hold on, before we get to this week's game specifically about them, I just going back to this week about the Lions. The Lions did so many things right.
Oh, they did so many things right. Yeah.
And as a team, I just want you to, out of the teams that won this week, which team impressed you the most that even with a difficult matchup, you could see them winning? Because there was a lot of impressive victories by a lot of these teams, but it seemed like the Detroit Lions had the most impressive win, even though it was the closest win.
See, I don't agree with that. I think the most impressive win by far was Houston. Given the fact that it was a rookie quarterback, how good Cleveland's defense was, and as a team, Houston owned that. I mean, Houston dominated that game. As you said, even though on the scoreboard there was the mathematical point where if Cleveland does throw that pick six and get tight, Houston was still controlling that game. And Detroit was good. Don't get me wrong, and they did very good.
But again, two young teams. These are two young teams that put up and made the other team shut up. And we have Green Bay with their impressive win. We have the Bucs with their impressive win. We have the Lions. I mean, these are names that we were like, whoa, going into the season, we knew about a couple of these, but the Bucs are certainly surprising. The Lions are definitely not as surprising. The Green Bay Packers, what they did is surprising. So going into this, as you see what the slate is for this week's games, who realistically and statistically, mathematically have the chances? So I guess this might get us to our best bets of the week here. Who has the best chances to put the momentum that they have right now into something?
Detroit. I mean, it's definitely Detroit. The way that pass rush is coming off, Baker Mayfield's an incredibly tough guy. Him and Stafford might be the two most I will play through pain. I guess you got to put Hurts on that list too. Play with a broken hand, but they're in that tier of you don't need to worry about him coming off the field. And that being said, the way that Detroit is getting pass rush with Aiden Hutchinson, which, by the way, if you're in Jacksonville, I hate the fact that you took Trayvon Walker instead of him. But you look at this and go, this guy's on fire. That whole pass rush is great. And you can't run through him anymore as easily. And not to say Tampa even tries to run the ball because that's not really their style. But from a stylistic matchup, Detroit will let up a big play, so I think it'll be an entertaining, fun game to watch. I do think Mike Evans will get some, but I think we're going to see a lot of Baker Mayfield on the ground, like a lot of Baker Mayfield.
So you're projecting then the NFC Championship game to be Lions versus the 49ers, correct?
I don't want to, but I think I am.
But you think you are, okay?
I would love to see Green Bay to be able to beat the Niners. I do think that Green Bay has
they have the talent to do it.
Scheme to beat the Niners defense. And I've said this throughout the year, it's not really rocket science, but just like putting pressure on Tyreek Hill, most people are afraid to do it. The Niners built an offense that will destroy Baltimore because of this, that is designed to kill you in the first 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. If you do anything left and right or lateral or run the ball, the Niners defense will eat you alive. You beat the Niners defense by going vertical and be willing to let your quarterback get hit. So you look at the Niners. They lost to Minnesota. What does Minnesota do? They don't care if their quarterback gets hurt, and they chuck the ball deep. That's a win. And that is where Green Bay's offense is. From a schematical standpoint, as long as they are willing to keep putting the shots downfield, if Lover does not get rattled, the Green Bay actually schematically is the only team left of all of them, that includes the AFC teams, maybe Houston, aside, that can beat the Niners. Kansas City can't beat the Niners. Niners. And Buffalo
Doesn't look
doesn't
like
have a
it.
good enough vertical passing threat now that Gabe Davis has disappeared. So when you look at this, if you are rooting against the Niners winning the Super Bowl, the only realistic option I see is the Packers doing. Because as much as I love Detroit, I do think they're good, I don't see a mob being able to rip open the top the way that's necessary. And with that being said, I would absolutely love to see Love win this one. And yes, I'm working Love in a lot. But I don't see a scenario where Green Bay's, despite them all being first rounders on defense, shutting down the quadrant that is Ayuk, Debo, McCaffrey, and Kittle. I don't think I see
It's a
any
tough
other
it's a tough
skill
sell
positions
because
that you put on the field coming close to that tier of talent.
it's a tough sell because most teams can only lock down one or two of them at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And most teams are not built to stop all four. And when you look
No
at
one is.
when you look at what there are some good defenses, but they're not present in that division.
I don't think there's a defense that can consistently say we're taking all four of them out. And the way that Shanahan builds his offense with so much spacing in it, almost always you're forced to have one-on-one on all four of them, or at least on two of the four of them, and then Purdy's smart enough to be able to read it.
So then, you look at what we're given here with this week's games, with projecting ahead. We think that the Lions are going to win. We think that the Niners are going to win. Mm-hmm. When it comes to the AFC, these games seem like they're a little bit closer to call. It seems like the script is there for Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills to win that game against Patrick Mahomes. And it seems like Baltimore has the strength to overcome this CJ Stroud led offense.
Yeah, I mean, Baltimore's defense is for real.
And I want to say it seems like, right? So
I guess this is the bottom line, Bob. I'm seeing the two Saturday games, which are the 2-1 seeds, playing at home, both being shootouts and both being take the points. Because always take the points in a shootout, especially when they're double-digit points. Mm-hmm. So I am seeing that from a betting standpoint. And the two Sunday games being, despite the fact I do think Detroit will crockpot them and just Tampa will be like, we never really had the ball. I mean, like, I don't know. like what happened? I think that's what's going to happen in Detroit.
Yeah.
And Buffalo is going to be, the way that Buffalo and Kansas City tend to play each other is lower scoring, see at the end what happens, which is what a lot of when great coaches play each other, that tends to be how they play. Just keep it close to the vest, open it up in the fourth quarter. And I suspect that type of game as well. So just which quarterback goes elite at the end. So I think that Kansas City Buffalo by far will be the tightest margin of victory, unless you get an upset by the Packers, because they're not going to blow out the Niners. Baltimore always has potential of winning by 50. That's the way Harbaugh is.
They do. But here's the thing.
I don't think you'll be able to do it against Bico Ryan's defense.
Here's the other thing that I want to bring up about that Texans-Ravens game is that, there's something about CJ Stroud to me that even when they're losing by a boatload, and this brings me back to that discussion about giving up in a game and knowing when you've lost and not taking it to the next level and getting yourself hurt or anything like that. CJ Stroud, as I said last week, this is his first time there. He's a pretty composed guy. He doesn't show a lot of emotion in press conferences and all that stuff.
Oh, he's playing with house money too. All the pressure's on Lamar.
I mean, he is your rookie of the year, offensive rookie of the year. He might just be the overall, if not for somebody else, he might just be the rookie of the year. So this pressure is so.
If he didn't get hurt, he would have been outright league MVP.
So this narrative now, and not speaking from a talent or a statistical standpoint, the narrative now is what can Lamar Jackson do? And my question to you is, in this game specifically, Houston should never really be out of this game, even if they're losing by 20, right? Because CJ Stroud is the type of guy that could take you back from being down 20 because he really has nothing holding him back, right?
Well, he could have Baltimore laying on him literally the entire game. That pass rush of the
Right,
Ravens,
that's the only thing that's there. But
that's Baltimore's best option to slowing down this passing attack. They don't have the coverage capability really of doing it. So to me, the game is straightforward. If Stroud has time to throw it, it's going down to the wire.
If Stroud gets an early lead, with this offense,
cash those points in now because you
will it be enough? Because we know that outside of Lamar, the Gus Bus is average. Mm-hmm. We know that Justice Hill is average. We're talking again about specialty running backs, just like we talked about the Philadelphia Eagles.
I would say that both of Baltimore's are worse than.
Where each one has a specialty, short yardage. I mean, thankfully, the Gus Bus does actually run it up the middle, unlike the Philadelphia players. But you go and you say to yourself, okay, do they have a chance? Do they have a chance to win this game? And 9.5 points, that's a big spread. But outright, if they get that early lead, there's a chance that they keep that early lead.
There is. And the other part you have to realize,
because then Baltimore can't take as many chances, right?
It's always a risk when you're dealing with Baltimore is that you're one hit away from winning it. You hit Lamar and you break him, or even if you just hit him and stun him, it's over. And Baltimore does nothing without Lamar.
Oh, yeah. I mean, nothing. Huntley looks okay. And both of these teams have good tight ends too, and Likely and Schultz. So this is offensively feels like a very even enough matchup offensively, with Baltimore taking the cake in terms of defense. But, if this offense can get going and Baltimore
9.5 though.
Right. I want the Texans to win at this point.
Call any of the underdogs to win outright, it's Houston.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the way that it is, and that includes Kansas City. So it would be Houston. The team that I give the least amount of chance of winning of all of the weekend is Tampa. So that's how I look at it. Bob, as we just hit 2 hours here, we're going to be concluding here. Any other final thoughts that you want to take into this divisional round?
I think that in these divisional rounds, we really see what talent is made of mentally, and are they able to overcome adversity? And so, typically speaking, in these games, there's luck involved, and you might get a doink here and there, or a busted coverage here and there. But when we talk about teams overcoming adversity, there's a lot of teams that are currently out there right now that this season specifically haven't really had to do much to overcome outside of Houston, the Lions, and Green Bay, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm writing off Tampa Bay, and I probably shouldn't, because Tampa Bay had adversity too. But you look at Baltimore, you look at San Francisco, you look at Kansas City, you look at the Bills, and for the most
Bills
part,
had a ton of adversity to get in the playoffs.
The Bills I will lump them in with the other category here, but for the most part, you were kind of, in a way, saying, "Oh, it is what it is." Maybe the Lions are more so in that not overcoming adversity this season, but over their entirety, there's a lot they're banking on. So that's why I'm including them in that category. But the teams
because they're a lot like San Francisco and the Niners. Realistically, they won the division 3 weeks to go.
Right, but like historically as an organization, the adversity is there. But for the Niners and the Ravens, the 2 number 1 seeds, there was really no doubt in anybody's mind going into season, and they can beat you in a lot of different ways. Mm-hmm. And so, like you brought up with the Niners, the question mark that I have for this week for these number one seeds is how much passion are they playing with? How much
passion isn't a factor in the playoffs.
Well, no, I'm not in that regard, because we saw that passion was a factor for the Philadelphia.
Oh no, if you start losing, you tank it.
That passion was a factor for the Dallas Cowboys. But this is why I bring this up, is because Green Bay has an offense that we saw can get a lead. We saw that the Texans can get a lead and keep a lead. We saw the Detroit Lions that they could keep a lead. We saw these teams, the Chiefs, the Bills, we saw that they can take leads and get leads. And so the question is, these are unequivocally, it feels like, for lack of keeping Philadelphia and Dallas out of it, that these teams are those teams that have been able to overcome and not give up on things. And so we typically see a couple of teams kind of just skate by. So I'm not saying that's anything against San Francisco or Baltimore, but this is that week where all of that pays off. This is the game where you can't give up. This is the game where you can't just say, oh, he's our best player, but having a terrible game, but gives us the best chance. Like, these are things that are going to be narratives in the game itself. So I'm looking at Mahomes and I'm saying, that doesn't feel like the Mahomes that I saw last year, that I saw the year before. That's going to be an issue. As it goes to Baltimore, Lamar Jackson. We know that Lamar Jackson does a lot. He's been pretty good at keeping the ball and not turning the ball over this year as much as he has in years past. Likely looks good. So Houston is probably going to have a tough path to win this week. San Francisco looks like a juggernaut, but they have been brought to their knees a couple of times this year, just with scheming and proper placement, which the Packers do really well sometimes. And then you've got the Lions against the Bucs. These are two teams. The Bucs are the team that has seen the playoffs more recently over and over again due to Tom Brady. But this is a team that has galvanized around Baker Mayfield. They've galvanized around what they've got going on there, around their coach and around just the general organization. Is that, the Lions have done the same thing. So there's a lot of similarities in a lot of these teams, and their best quality might not be the talent that's on the field. It might be the mindset that they have. It might be that's the thing that takes them to the next level. So that's kind of just my final thought there, because amongst everything else, that passion is what's going to take them to the next level. And like you said, these playoffs, they mean a lot for every player that's in it. Every game means a lot. And so you're going to be bringing out your best. And pound for pound, best for best, we really do have some really good teams still playing.
Yeah, that's well said. And also, if it comes strictly down to passion, Detroit will be your Super Bowl champions. We'll see y'all next week, guys. Let's go, Dan Campbell.